What's happening, everybody? Welcome back. This is Forgo, and I thought I'd do a follow-up video to the top 10 best awakened characters. We're going to be doing the top 10 best support characters. And the thing to keep in mind whenever, when we're talking about this is, where are these characters viable? How viable are they? How many characters can they actually support? And which characters do they support? These are things you need to always keep in mind whenever you're judging what kind of support you actually want to level up and build up. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is in-world boss. Once you reach certain stages, you're not going to need certain typings. You're going to need certain different rate genders and so on and so on. Whenever you're doing stage 1 to 9 against Null or Mephisto, anything goes. It doesn't matter if they're villain. It doesn't matter if they're heroes. Anything goes. So it's all good. And that's what this list is actually going to be based on. Because if I sit and calibrated, what characters are actually going to be good from, stage 10 to stage 14, then I can only use, males, right? If I go from stage 14 or stage 15 and 19, then I can only use humans. So then your mutants can't be applied and your aliens can't be applied. So this list is mainly from stage 1 to 9. So keep that in mind. The list probably have a different rating for you because maybe you're in a different place in the game. Maybe you're facing a different level of world boss where you actually need a different support. Maybe you need more female supports. Maybe you need more male supports, and so have you and so have you. The other thing that's going to constitute, where these characters rank is how many characters do they apply to, right? And which characters do they apply to? Which characters are they actually buffing? So like, for example, there's certain characters that only apply to a few characters in the game, like War Machine here. War Machine's a terrific character. He's an amazing standalone character, and he does buff up Cable, which is one of the strongest characters in the game, right? That's amazing. But that's pretty much about it when it comes to that. He does have the 30% increase of physical attack, but the reason that he's not on this list is because he only applies to one character. I mean, he does have the machine type here, and that does work on other characters. But the thing is, when you go to machine here, you're going to see that, Vision and Cable and Iron Man are the big three, right? So, I mean, that's going to be viable for some people, but it's only 3 characters, right? As far as PvE content is concerned. I'm looking for supports that's going to buff up more characters. Now, obviously, if you're trying to make Cable, you're trying to make Iron Man stronger, then you would want someone like War Machine, or you'd want someone like Hulkbuster for Iron Man because his leadership applies specifically to Iron Man. Or you'd want, Vision because Vision's leadership applies strictly to Scarlet, giving her a huge buff for Scarlet. But we're looking at supports that's actually going to apply to more characters than not. So the first one would be Scarlet Witch. She's ranked at number 10. And the reason is because of her leadership. Applies to all allies, so it doesn't matter if they're villain, heroes, 45% increase of energy attack. And some of our strongest characters in the game are energy based. The thing about Scarlet that's really nice and why I put her on this list is because she's also an ABX meta. She's also a pretty high DPS in character on her own, so you get kind of like the better of both worlds with this character. You get a great DPS character and you have a great leadership on top of that. Whenever you're switching your characters in and out and world boss, you can actually use her as a DPS character, which is pretty damn sweet. The next one, in my opinion, would be Spectrum. Now, the reason Spectrum is on this list is because of her leadership, right? This 36% increase of energy attack and then the ignore target dodge by 36% is nice. Having this ignore target dodge rate leadership is going to really help because it means you can actually use an extra damage to supervillain Striker, right? Increasing their damage. It's just an amazing leadership. Plus, Spectrum is a pretty damn strong character, right? Just like Scarlet, you can switch her in and out. You can use her as a sub DPS character for like maybe your main DPS characters and really do put in some work in those world bosses, right? I mean, this list, you can vary this. You can actually change this up a little bit. This is just the way that I'm actually rating them. The next one would be Crescent. Now, the bad thing about Crescent is, and the reason she's a little bit lower, I mean, she does have a great leadership in her newest uniform, right? She gets a 60% increase to physical attack, not just combat, but to physical attack. And that's an amazing leadership. It's the best physical attack leadership in the game, right? It's the best. I mean, you can't see it right here, but she does increase physical attack leaderships by 60%. So she's pretty massive. And just like Scarlet, just like Spectrum, you can use her as a sub DPS character, right? You can use her, you can switch her in and out and use her. I find that characters that you can use more often, like actually, they're just not there actually as a support, but you can actually use them as a sub DPS. They have a little bit more relevance, although some supports are just so good, they're going to come out on top over these types of characters. Then the next one would be Ebony. Now, Ebony in this uniform is absolutely insane because you get this increase of energy attack to all allies, right? But to boot, when you have the uniform, you actually get this increase to damage to supervillain types by 35%, and then the decreased damage from increased damage to universal types by 35%, and decreased damage received from universals by 35%. I keep wanting to say supervillains, but it's to universals and decreased damage from universals. And this applies to all allies. This is an insane support. So you can use them as a support in PvP. Ebony's actually really good in PvP, or you can use them as a support in PvE. And just like the other characters, he's a great sub DPS character. Ebony is freaking strong. At tier 3, he can put out a lot of damage. This is a very, very good character. I mean, he's an expensive character, but in my opinion, he's well worth it. He's one of the best supports in the game, and that's why he's ranked at number 7. Then we get into the next one, which would be Cyclops. Now, Cyclops is amazing for a couple reasons. One, you can use him as a villain or a hero, depending on if you have this uniform, which is nice, right? That adds a lot of versatility for him, but also his leadership, right? The 35% increase of all attack, this is going to apply to all allies, right? Villain, hero, it doesn't matter, right? So his leadership is applicable to all the characters in the game. Plus you can switch his uniform out, use him as a villain, use him as a hero throughout all the world bosses, because sometimes they will change the typing that you actually need. And then his passive gives a 30% increase of energy attack with the Phoenix uniform. With his other uniforms, it's going to be 15%, but still combined with 35% all attack, that is 50% increase of energy attack to your energy attack characters. And to your physical attacking characters, you're still going to get 35%. Just an amazing support and an amazing leadership for a lot of your characters. And that's why he's ranked number 6. Now we get into two characters that I kind of go back and forth on, which are Proxima and Wave. Now, Proxima is amazing. Like for against Null, I put Proxima's stocks a little bit better than Wave's because her leadership actually gives the ignore target dodge rate by 45% and the critical damage by 30%. Not to mention that her uniform effect gives the increased basic damage to superheroes and super villains, right? Which is awesome, but it only applies to villains. This is the kind of thing about this uniform, right? So against Null for villains, this is the better uniform to have instead of Wave. But Wave here is amazing for your heroes, right? This increased damage to supervillains by 50% is massive, but it only applies to heroes. So like against Mephisto, she's actually an insane leadership. One, because she's a speed type, she can put in some damage against Mephisto, she got the type advantage, but also the fact that she has this crazy increased damage to supervillains by 50%, that is massive with her leadership. She's actually, and really especially for Namor, she's a better leadership for Mephisto, but against Null, she's a really great leadership as long as you got some ignore dodge for your heroes. But I actually think that Proxima would probably be better because Proxima actually is a better sub DPS character. She's much stronger than Wave. So I kind of go back and forth between the slots 4 and 5 when it comes to Wave and Proxima. It really depends on the characters you're trying to build them up for. I mean, obviously, if you have more villains, you have your stronger villains built up, you're going to want Proxima. If you have more heroes, then you're probably going to want Wave. And now for number 3. So number 3 is going to be Taskmaster with his uniform, right? And that's because this guy applies to all allies, right? And he is a male human. So you can use him a lot. And, you know, the increased damage to superheroes and supervillains, he's just insane. And he applies to villains, he applies to heroes. And it's pretty much all he is. He's not really a very good sub DPS character. But because of his uniform effect here, it's just so good for all of your characters in the game. It is just nice, right? Not to mention that, you know, if a character has Weapon Master, they get the guaranteed critical rate. So if they're using a rage, they're going to have that extra guaranteed critical rate to proc the rage. They get the ignore target dodge rate by 20%. He's just insane, right? And that's why he's number 3. So who's number 2 and who's number 1? Well, number 2 is going to be White Fox. Now, I know some of you are thinking, wait a minute. No. White Fox should be number 1. Hear me out. White Fox's deal is her passive only applies to characters with leadership. Now, to be fair, there are an insane amount of characters that have leadership. War Machine, Cable, Sharon Rogers, Luna, Crescent, the Eternals. Like, there's a bunch of them that have the leadership tag. Winter Soldier, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that have the leadership tag. I believe Falcon, right? I mean, Sentry. I mean, there's a bunch of them, right? It's an amazing leadership. But the reason that she's number 2 is, one, if you have her final uniform, it's going to be the Mega Supreme, right? This thing's going to be Mega Supreme, but this thing costs money, and that's why it's a little bit lower, right? It doesn't apply to all the characters, but man, it applies to a hell of a lot of the strongest characters in the game. That's the reason it's number 2. I mean, if you have this thing, this increased all basic attack by 15%, the chain hit damage by 10%, the ignore target dodge rate by 30%. It's just insane, right? Not to mention the increased damage to supervillains by 65%. This is a nutso uniform, but you got to pay real money for the thing. That's what hurts its value. But it only applies to characters with leadership. Now, this support here from a uniform effect does apply to all heroes. So all of your heroes, when she's on the team, they get that chain hit damage, they get that ignore target dodge rate, and they get that increased attack by 15%. So even if they don't have leadership, she still applies to all the heroes. Not your villains, but she's still going to apply to all the heroes. And that's another reason why she's still at number 2. But who's number 1? Well, you guys probably have already figured it out, but number 1 is going to be Valkyrie. And Valkyrie is number 1 because, 1, her passive applies to all allies, and she has the ignore target dodge rate by 30% and the increased damage to supervillains by 50%. And then the decreased damage from supervillains by 25% is also amazing to help your characters be a little bit tankier. She is the best support in the game, in my opinion. 1, because she's actually pretty damn strong. A lot of people are going to use her in ABX. She's a great sub DPS character, and she also applies to all the allies. It doesn't matter if they're hero, villain, if they have leadership, if they have technical kinetic, it doesn't matter. She applies to all of them. Her versatility is over the top. It's the best in the game, right? Whenever you have a character like this that can apply to all of your characters, it's nice, right? I mean, the only time any of these characters or any of these supports get restricted is like whenever you only have to use, you know, human males, or you have to use females, and so on and so on and so on. And that just can't be helped, right? That's just the way it is. But whenever you're talking just stage 1 to 9, right? Whenever you're talking about, you know, all the characters being available at any time in World Boss, then this is the way that I would rate these supports. And there are other supports in the game that are really good. I mean, Winter Soldier has a 30% increase in physical attack. Captain Marvel has a 30% increase of energy attack, right? Which is really, really good, honestly, if you have Captain Marvel. She's amazing for Moonstone, because whenever you use your co-op skill with Moonstone, Captain Marvel actually does her 5th skill, and you can actually do an insane amount of damage, right? And she applies to all allies. I mean, she's a really good leadership as well. She's actually decent in PvP. I mean, there are some honorable mentions here. Cersei's a great support for your Eternals, but I mean, there's only 3 Eternals in the game. Jessica's a really good support for your defenders, but I mean, come on, there's not that many defenders. Icarus, you know, his leadership applies to Eternals, but again, there's only like 3 Eternals. Black Bolt's only applies to Inhumans, and they're just not on the list on the top 10 because the supports only apply to certain characters, or the support just isn't a high enough stat boost. And that's why all the other ones were ahead of these others. I mean, Magneto's is really great for mutants. Doctor Strange actually has a really good leadership as well, with the 30% increase of energy attack and the ignore target dodge rate by 20%. That applies to all allies. It's actually damn good. I almost thought about putting him on the list. You know, you got Star-Lord, his applies to only blast types. You got Storm, who has the elemental increase to damage. But I believe the 10 that I gave you guys are really the 10 best. I mean, Medusa's also really good for universal types. Chavez has a little leadership. Ben Grimm's really good for your Fantastic Four. But again, it only applies to Fantastic Four allies. I mean, there's a lot of other really great supports, but I believe the 10 that I gave you are the best overall. So let me know what y'all think about this list. And I do stream on Twitch at 9 p.m. GMT+7 time. The link is in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Y'all take care and have a good one. See ya.